Wrath of Angels. Chapter 4, Scene 1. The Descent. On the Shrine-World Veyla. Month 6, Year 260. The 41st Millennium. The Wrath's hangar bays did not feel like work halls. They had become cathedrals of exhaust and thunder, lit by the liturgy of warning lamps. Thunderhawks strained on their clamps, turbines exhaling like the breath of caged gods. Storm ravens hunched in their pens, predatory silhouettes haloed in exhaust that curled into script and uncoiled again. Servo cranes passed over the decks on black chains, their iron links clanking in a rhythm that might have been the tolling of cloister bells if one stood far enough away and lied to oneself. The mortal crews moved in patterns so exact, a scribe could have scored them on vellum, every motion correct, every misstep a potential blasphemy. Ammunition crates were lifted like reliquaries. Chains were tightened with whispered litanies. Even the smells became part of devotion, promethium sharp as incense, oil heavy as sacramental wine, sweat salted like an offering. Sparks hung in the haze from plasma vents, like a captive galaxy inside the ship's lungs. And silence, not peace, but enforced silence, pressed into every mouth and muscle. The Wrath's machine spirit was awake, and suspicion weighed on every soul like gravity. There were truths not to be said aloud, and questions that would be punished by being answered. Lisa's back sang with a treble of pain. The shell case bit into her palms and collarbone, and memory at once. Calibanite pattern. Approved, the stencil read. Letters painted over so many times the edges bled into one another. She could feel the old paint ridges through the rough webbing. The case slid as she shifted her grip. Her boots skidded on a ribbon of spilled oil. The world tilted. Rel was there before panic found its name, his scarred hand braced beneath the canister's weight, his shoulder leaning into her weakness as if it were his job to pretend it did not exist. On me, he said without looking at her. Not comfort. Correction. They carried the case together 3 steps, then 6, then 12. The last distance to the embark rail, where Jask waited with a grease pencil and a face that had forgotten how to unclench. 71, Jask muttered, then crossed the number out and wrote it again. 71. No, 72. Saints preserve us. 70. The pencil tip snapped. He licked it out of habit and tasted graphite and ash, and the inside of an old prayer book. A watcher drifted across their path. Child small and hooded in green so deep it seemed to have been stolen from an ancient forest. It carried a strip of parchment between careful hands as though it held a baby bird. The writing on it bled like veins. Lisa's marrow froze. She and the crate both sagged. Rel took the weight. Jask's broken pencil fell and skittered in a perfect line toward the drain. The watcher did not look at them, but its presence was a finger pressed to the ship's lips. It paused at the flank of the Thunderhawk and pressed the parchment to the fuselage until it stuck. The ink smoked and then did not. The creature inclined its head as if satisfied, then slid away without sound, a punctuation mark moving between sentences. "Why do they mark the birds?" Lisa whispered, and immediately wished she had not. "So the ship remembers where to bite," Rel said. He said it like a joke and like a warning. Jask stooped for the pencil and found his hands shaking so badly he could not pick it up. Another watcher relieved him of the decision by arriving at his elbow with a second slip. It held the parchment flat in both hands. Jask stared at the symbols as if they might rearrange into mercy. The watcher tilted the strip toward him until the wet ink caught the light. He nodded because not nodding seemed dangerous. The creature pressed the parchment into his palm with the soft insistence of a mother placing bread there. By the time he tried to read, The Watcher was a memory with weight and nothing else. On the far side of the bay, a different Watcher trailed black oil across the ribbed flank of a Ravenwing bike, smearing a rune that had no place in any lexicon the Mechanicum would admit existed. Sergeant Kalen saw the mark and did not arrest the hand that made it. He lifted his gauntlet, and with that single motion, the riders behind him adjusted half steps, half breaths, half heartbeats. The omen belonged to the ship, their obedience belonged to him. Sirens pealed once, long and low. The wrath inhaled. The air tasted like a foundry and a funeral. The warriors came like a procession no one dared announce. The Oathbound of the Sanctum entered the hangar, as if the deck were an altar, and they the officiants. Dominiel dragged Mortalis, so the chain kissed the iron with sparks, and the ship shivered at the familiar pain. Lutherian's storm shield bore scripture cut so deep, a knife would lose itself in the lines. Zephynis' lips moved in conversation, with a choir only he could hear, a smile flickering, the kind that fit better on a skull. Ramiel rumbled his litany backwards, syllables dropping like stones down a dry well. Faith recited the wrong way, so no demon could learn it by eavesdropping. Abriath's gaze ticked across gantries and shadowed vaults, mapping fields of fire in a room that did not yet deserve them. Mortals flinched as the Deathwing passed. One mouth found the courage to shape a word. Angels? The question hung, a moth about to burn. No one answered. The Oathbound stepped into the teleport cloisters as saints into glass. The warding sigils came alive, pale auroras crawling around ceramite. For a heartbeat, the five were lit from within. Then the light took them. Reality clapped its hands 5 times, and they were gone. The smell they left behind was ozone and oaths. The Ravenwing surged, a blade drawn so fast, the eye remembered it after it saw it. Kalen raised a hand, and the entire cohort, every bike, every rider, every breath, obeyed. His signals were scripture, a cut for close ranks, a flick for brake line, 2 fingers for ride the gutter. Veyna bent over his auspex and spoke to it like a doctor to a frightened child. Tyrion unhooked himself from the light and became a moving absence. Shadows behaved in his presence as if they owed him rent. Orath revved as if joy were a fuel he could force down the intake. Kalen glanced at him, a look sharp enough to bleed, and the engine throttled back to a disciplined purr. Celian's voice ran through the squad's vox like a silver filament. Ingress coordinates, dead ground, interlocks, sightlines. Mortals covered their ears without meaning to. The bike's exhaust coughed black smoke that smelled like an argument with a priest. Then the Grenwing, the Emerald Vow, arrived as the answer to a prayer that had not been spoken aloud. Sergeant Varicon walked at their head, the shape of command wrapped in ceramite. "Form," he said, and they did. "Speak your vow." They did that as well, one by one, voices steady or cracked, each word binding. Garen cuffed Jorath with more care than it looked, knocking the young warrior's helmet forward with a dull clack that rewrote defiance into obedience. Ephra's prayer grew loud enough to compete with engines, until Malvin raised the banner, and green light cut through the noise like a verdict, steadying the squad by being too bright to look at for long. Torvain tested the mount of his heavy weapon, as if he were measuring a sentence before passing it. Halric spoke once, softly, and the temperature in the squad fell by a useful few degrees. Varicon made them speak the vow again, not for his sake, for the ship's. Across the deck, a Mechanicum adept limped with a sensor, smoke blooming into words that anyone could read and no one could argue with. IGNITE. Endure. Destroy. He pressed a hot iron stamp against each fuel valve, leaving circular brands that hissed and glittered. In that light, he looked like a walking brazier in red and brass. His metal foot ticked against the deck like a metronome that had seen God. and was unimpressed. Lisa and Rel finished with the crate and found there were more. There were always more. They passed another watcher, this one no taller than her hip, holding a parchment that seemed longer than its arm. The creature turned its head the smallest degree toward Lisa as it drifted by, as if to acknowledge that she existed and would continue to, for now. She did not breathe until it was gone. Rel said, "Don't look at them," and the order felt like kindness. The hangar's ash doors were still closed. Behind them lay Veyla, a world of saints and bones and bell metal and dust. Lisa had been a pilgrim once, long years past. She remembered standing in the shadow of a basilica and believing that the shadow itself was a sacrament. She remembered buying a votive of green glass and lighting it with a stick touched to another flame. She remembered the way the glass had smelled as it heated. She wondered if that basilica still stood, and if not, whether its glass sang when trodden on. Sirens pealed a second time, shorter. The cranes froze mid-swing, as if caught performing a sin and deciding not to. A hush rolled from the bay entrance to the bulkheads, like a physical thing. The ash doors unfolded with the solemnity of a relic case. Beyond them, Veyla turned. Cathedra spires were snapped into ribs. Plazas were drowned in ash like snow that had learned how to hate. Bells lay half-buried, their mouths filled with grit, tongues stilled. Above, the bridge hummed like a chapel that had learned to calculate. Commander Seraphiel stood beneath the hololithic dome, helm under his arm, scars bright as small moons on his shaven scalp. The dome showed him the world as a set of lies that were close enough to truth to be useful. His gauntlet hovered over runes for a breath longer than custom allowed, as if he was speaking to someone not present and expecting the courtesy of an answer. When it did not come, he pressed the rune anyway. "Strike swift," he said into 1,000 throats of brass and ghost and oath. "Hold silence." Interrogator Chaplain Melchizedek knelt near the command rail, Hag Crozius across his knees, like a judgment waiting for the accused to finish their last meal. He opened his Vox channel for a heartbeat. The hiss that came through sounded like a crowd inhaling at the same time. He shut it again. The sermon would be sharper for being caged. The skull of his Vox grill looked pleased at the thought of being used later. Varadiel, Librarius Commander, stood with his hands posed lightly on the haft of his force blade, as if he were balancing a scale. His eyes were pale with light from somewhere not present. The hololith refused to hold still for him. Angles where there should have been arcs, colors where there should have been numbers. A sense that the map had learned a new grammar in the last hour and refused to translate for anyone but him. "The sky resists," he said softly. "Not in direction, in angle. I will walk them through as far as I may." "Walk them," Seraphiel said. The word allowed for failure only insofar as it would be punished later. Mortals manning the bridge consoles pretended to be furniture. One dropped a stylus and did not bend to pick it up. Down in the hangar, the Oathbound vanished, reality clapping 5 times again, as if to mark the beginning of a mass. Ravenwing engines howled as bikes rolled toward the ramps, Kalen's signals slicing clean paths through the noise. Celian's voice threaded the Vox net like a wire under tension. Boulevard 1. Statue's hands wired, glass paths safe, gatehouse arc 3 degrees high. Ride the gutter, acknowledge. Kalen's answer, obey, meant more than assent. It meant the orders would become facts, and the facts would become corpses. The Emerald Vow boarded in formation so tight that when the ramp lowered, they stood already aligned, as if a sculptor had carved them out of a single block. Malven anchored the banner's haft into the socket that had been forged exactly where it was, for exactly this purpose. Garen's jaw set to stone. Jorath whispered a prayer that did not sound like a prayer until the 3rd line. Ephris's voice cracked, bled, then gathered itself and rose. Torvain leaned his weapon into its cradle as a judge sets his hands on a bench. Halric murmured his one word and cooled the room he lived in. The clamps released. The first Thunderhawks tore free of gravity's patience and proved that patience finite. Engines screamed. The hangar vibrated like an organ playing a note too low to hear. Lisa forgot to breathe again. Rel put his hand on the crate only to convince his body that it still existed. Jask counted the seconds after the sirens died and discovered there were too many of them for comfort. A watcher padded to the place where the Oathbound had stood and pressed a tiny clean strip of parchment into a seam between deck plates. It smoothed the scrap with the flat of a small hand, a gesture that looked exactly like planting a seed. The Wrath groaned. Somewhere deep in her bones, a door remembered how to open. It did not. Thunderhawks plunged into the cloud like fast answers to slow prayers. The descent hammered bones, rattled teeth, taught inner ears a lesson about humility. Outside, the sky changed color by the kilometer. Black ash banks with lightning walking inside them like old gods. Then a grey smeared with the oils of dead machines. Then a blue that might have been honest once and was not anymore. Pilgrim convoys lay across dead roads like rosaries spilled and broken mid-prayer. The stained glass crowns of cathedra had fallen and shattered and built new geographies out of sharp colors. Where the wind walked on them, they sang. Inside, the troop holds the world bucked like a thing offended. Armor locked to deck plates. Magnets argued with turbulence. Every bolt felt the ship's opinion of them. Ephra's prayer found a lower gear and changed key. Other voices joined, some in faith, some only to have something to do with their mouths. Jorath pressed the back of his skull against ceramite and saw faces in the storm that pressed back, eyes and mouths that asked questions in his mother's voice. Garen punched him in the pauldron hard enough to bang bone. "Discipline," he said, and the face became a stain on the inside of Jorath's eyelids and nothing else. Torvain braced his heavy weapon against the bulkhead, as if to convince the ship that weight could be argued with. Malvin's banner burned green in the dim, as if lit from a place without shadows. Varakon looked at each man in turn and said nothing. The silence he gave them was heavier than any speech. In the cockpit, the pilot and gunner spoke a language made of machine names and prayers. Altitude false, recalibrate, faith corrects. The auspex flickered with static like bees. The pilot tapped the screen with a knuckle, as if reminding a child of its own name. The gunner's thick fingers made the sign of the Aquila on a brass plate that had not cared about such things yesterday, and cared very much now. The hull rang as ash struck it with the malice of small stones. Lightning crawled the skin of the craft like veins learning a new geography. Kaelin's bikes spat out of their Thunderhawk in a staggered wave, tires screaming when they hit ash and then biting. Celian's voice laid lanes on the ground that did not exist until the bikes rode them. Left gutter carries, right arc high, statuary unstable. Shadow door at 38 degrees. Ignore, false depth. Orath laughed once for the joy of speed, before Kaelin's voice took the laugh away. Tyrion vanished into smoke and became the suggestion of movement on the edge of a mortal's retina. Teleport flare cracked a plaza into 5 equal arguments. Thunder fell without a sky. The Oathbound appeared in a ring of dust, like saints called to a judgment they intended to pass. Dominiel spun Mortalis once, and the world learned to be afraid of circles. Lutharion set the edge of his shield into ash, as if to measure how hard the planet would fight to keep it. Zephanis tilted his head to hear something no one else had been invited to. Abriath sighted along a line that had not been built yet, and smiled as if nothing delighted him more than projects. Ramiel's backwards prayer shook the windows of broken cathedra and made the glass sing a wrong note. The Emerald Vow's Thunderhawk slammed down with the sincerity of a thrown stone. The ramp screamed, then yielded, then slammed the deck hard enough to wake saints. Ash poured up the slope like a tide determined to enter a church. Varicon stepped into it with the carefulness of a man stepping onto the back of a living animal. "First step is sin," he said so softly only his squad heard. "Second is absolution." Malvern lifted the banner, and the ash wind liked it enough to carry it, and the green fire caught all the eyes that still cared about colours. Lysa, who had been a pilgrim and was now a crewwoman and would someday be whatever the ship decided, stood at the hangar mouth with her hands flat against the crate that had become her altar. She watched the last Thunderhawk become a smaller noise. Rel's breath rasped next to hers. Jask's lips moved. He had stopped counting. The watcher that had pressed the parchment into his palm had not come back to explain what he held. He folded it and put it in his cheek like a miser with a coin. The wrath exhaled. The sound ran through her bulkheads and beams and bones. Men who had lived aboard her for years looked at one another and did not say the word alive. On the bridge, Seraphiel watched runes become trajectories, and trajectories become wounds waiting to be inflicted. Varadil's hand traced a figure in the air that had too many angles and not enough mercy. Melchizedek lifted his crozier's 2 fingers' width and set it down again, as if feeding a caged animal a promise. "Strike swift," Seraphiel said once more, though there was no tactical reason to. "Hold silence." The order walked itself down every wire and into every ear and made a home there. The ship listened to its own voice and found it agreeable. And Veyla, gutted Shrine-World with saints toppled and bells half buried, and glass learning new songs in the wind, lifted a hand of ash to receive the angels. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 4, Scene 1, The Descent. Chapter 4, Scene 2 follows.